someone's absent and they want to learn it, or next year if I have a sub this day, they can watch it. Okay, so the two types of notation we're going to talk about are inequality and interval notation. Now, inequality you guys have known for a long time. Like, you probably started learning about inequalities in elementary school, I'm guessing. But the symbols are the ones that the less than and the greater than symbols. So, which one is this?
Less than.
That's less than. Right, and then we have another version of it with this bar underneath. What does that mean?
Less than or equal to.
So when you have that or equal to bar, then whatever is beside is included. So we'll talk about included and not included a lot today. All right, and then we have greater than and greater than or equal to. Okay, that one, I'm going to draw the arrow up. That one also, the number will be included. Now, sometimes you use these inequalities to represent between two numbers. So when representing between two numbers, you're going to put the smaller number on the left. So the smaller number we're going to call a lower bound. Now that smaller number is not going to be an infinity or a negative infinity on the left. So it's going to be a number on the left, so lower bound. Right, and then you're going to have less than. And then the variable is in the middle. And then you have another less than, and then it's the upper bound. All right, so if you're ever using inequalities to represent two numbers, smaller number on the left, bigger number on the right, and then you always do lessons, or you can do less than or equal to's. Now those both can be less than or equal to's, or one can be less than or equal to, and one can just be less than. All right, so hopefully that's nothing super new to you. Now, interval notation, you use parentheses or brackets and a comma in between. So I'm just going to start off just to represent it using parentheses, and we'll talk about when you do which. So on the left side is going to be the lower bound, and then you'll have a comma, and then the right number is going to be the upper bound, and then you'll either have a parenthesis or a bracket. This is the same way as saying in between two numbers, but just with an interval instead of an inequality. So those of you that did interval notation last year, do you remember if you do parenthesis when it's not included or parentheses when it's included?
Not.
Right, so parentheses when it's not included. And then brackets when it is included. All right, and it's possible you could have one parenthesis and one bracket, or both brackets or both parentheses.
In what scenario would you have one parentheses and one bracket?
So if you include one number but don't include the other number.
So you say like infinity or something?
Well, infinity is a little different. Infinity is not bounded, but infinity will be on interval notation. So do you think you can include infinity or it's not included? Yeah. Because as soon as you think you have the biggest number in the world, you can just add one to it and you have a bigger number. So you always use parentheses with infinity or negative infinity. All right, so I know a lot of the problems we've been doing have made you like really think. Today is the day that you just kind of do it. You don't have, it's not going to require you to think deeply today. Well, we'll come back to this over and over throughout the year, so it is an important lesson. Okay, so what we're going to do on the first example is interpret the meaning, so just kind of write out in words what it means, and then draw a graph, and the graph is just going to be a number line. All right, so what does this mean? These symbols, I would greater than 3. So we're going to say all real numbers. I'm going to get a little lazy. Greater than 3. Right, and if we go to do that on the number line, we would just draw a number line. And we can put as many numbers on here as you want, but really the only number we need is 3. Now, when I taught this in Algebra 2, and then when you learned it in probably Algebra 1 or wherever, you would do an open circle here. It's going to look slightly different for precalculus. So instead of an open circle, when it's not included, you're going to do a parenthesis on the graph, okay? And so the numbers that are greater than 3 are the numbers to the right. So we would put a parenthesis that's kind of opening to the right, and then we would shade to the right.
Why make it so difficult?
It's not difficult, it's just new. So just think, anytime you would have done an open circle, you're going to do a parenthesis. Anytime you would have done a closed circle, you're going to do a bracket. Okay, let's look at B. So for B, this is still going to be all real numbers. And then when you have this two numbers and then the less thans, that's when we're representing between. So all real numbers between -1 and 2. Are we including either one of those numbers? 2. So we're going to put including 2. Okay. And then when I go to do the number line, like I said before, you can put as many numbers as you want to on it. But in this case, all we need is -1 and 2. Okay. Since we are not including -1, we're going to do a parenthesis there. We are including 2, so we'll do a bracket there. And then we shade in between. So just make sure that your parentheses and your bracket are opening up to where the shading is. I know that sounded weird when I said it. Does that make sense? You're not going to want a bracket like going away from where you shaded. I think that's common sense, but I don't know. We'll see. Okay, now C is the first one that's interval notation. So this is going to be all of the real numbers that are from 4 to infinity. How can you describe that in a better way? Would you say those numbers, the real numbers, are going to be greater than 4 or less than 4? Greater than 4. Infinity is greater than 4. So all real numbers greater than 4. And I probably should have made this one a little different than A, but that's okay. So we'll go to our number line. 4. We are not including 4, so we do a parenthesis and then shade to the right because we're greater than. All right, so for D, that's interval notation again. So anytime it's a notation and you just have a parentheses or brackets and two numbers, that's going to be interval notation. So this is going to be all real numbers between -2 and 3, including -2. Okay, you guys try to do that graph on your own, please.
Which one? X is positive?
Nope, D. Do the graph on your own.
Oh, like
Now, when you guys go to do these, I think you're going to like that we're doing brackets and parentheses because you just match up with what's in your interval. So because I had a bracket on -2, I'm going to have a bracket on -2. That's supposed to be a bracket. And then parenthesis on 3, and we just shade in between. All right, and then for E, we want to interpret the meaning of X is positive. So again, we're going to start off with all real numbers. How can you describe the real numbers that are positive?
greater than 0.
Nice job. Greater than 0. Do we include 0? Is 0 positive? 0 is neutral. We don't include it. All right. All right, the next two examples are going to go way faster. We don't have to write words. We don't have to draw. We're just going to write the notation. So we're kind of working backwards. So on number 2, we have interval notation. We want to change it to inequality notation. And so this is between the numbers between -3 and 4. So we're going to start with -3 less than x less than 4. Do I need an or equal to bar on either one of those numbers? Nope. So that's it. Okay. What about we want to do an inequality to represent the interval from -infinity to -1? We're actually not going to do it that way. It's not technically wrong. But we're going to do another way though. How else could you do it if you just started with x?
Less than or equal to -1.
Yes, good. So if we're going from -infinity to -1, those are all the x's that are less than or equal to -1. All right, now these copies weren't great. This is an actual parenthesis. All right, so we're going to start with x again. And then this is going to be x is greater than -1 because those are where it's shaded is all the places where x is greater than. Okay, and then the last example, we're going to go from inequality notation to interval notation. Now, interval notation is definitely my favorite. So I'll probably ask you to do it more than I'll ask you to do the other one, but you do need to know both. And so if we want to do an interval for x is less than 4, what is the smallest number that's less than 4?
-infinity.
Yes, so it's the smallest number in the world, -infinity. And we're going to go all the way to 4. Are we going to include 4?
No.
We are not, so we're going to do a parenthesis. All right. And then B, this is how you represent in between -4, and 9. So those are going to be our two numbers. Are we going to put parentheses or brackets on -4? And then brackets on 9. Good job. All right, and then these are brackets. All right, so when it's already has brackets, it's, to me, it's kind of obvious that you do brackets, and it's just from -3 to 0. Okay, so your assignment actually came out of the book today, but I just kind of cut and pasted it. We're not doing all of these. I made these copies before I decided which ones I wanted you to do. So we're just going to go through and mark some out. We're not going to do 1 through 4. And then in the next section, we're not going to do 6, 8, or 10. All right, and we are doing 11 through 22, just like they are. All right, we're not doing 23 through 28. Let's go through and label the parentheses and brackets just because it's hard to see. So on number 13, that is a parenthesis, if you can't see it. On 14, there's a bracket at -2 and a parenthesis at +2. And then on 19, they're both parentheses. And on 20, it's a bracket. All right, there's a couple more we're going to mark out too. Actually, we're just going to mark out some directions. All right, and then at the bottom, the 29 through 32, we are going to convert to inequality notation, but we're not going to state whether the interval is bounded or unbounded or whether it is open or closed, and we're not going to identify the endpoints. And on the last set of directions, I'm okay if you don't state what the meaning of the variable.